Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 43 of the Strokecast. This week, telemedicine and Sentinel healthcare. You know, after my stroke and really before my stroke too, I'm supposed to monitor my blood pressure regularly. I think most of us probably are. That means I have to put the cuff on my arm at home, relax while it reads the data, record that data on my log, and print off the log when I go to see the doctor every few months. And that seems fairly simple, right? Well, here's where it gets complicated. Because my left arm was affected by my stroke, I can't get reliable blood pressure readings there. Tone, spasticity, occasional edema, and lack of use, and even variable circulation means that the results are simply less accurate. That means, of course, I have to put the cuff on my right arm to get a good reading. Have you ever tried to scratch your right elbow with your right hand? Yeah, you can see the challenge. As I've gotten a little more use of my left arm back, I can kind of get the cuff in place if I also use my teeth. That, of course, involves frustration, effort, and all sorts of movement. And you know what all that does, right? Yup, it raises my blood pressure. When the girlfriend is around, she can place the cuff, which certainly helps. Of course, that's also best in the summer. In the winter, I'm wearing fleece or sweaters, and I really don't want to take them off in the cold. So now I'm even less likely to take a reading. When I do take a reading during the day and log it, well, that's great. And that data may actually be helpful in another 6 months. But what if there was a better way? Longtime listeners will be happy to welcome neurologist and Sentinel Healthcare CEO, Dr. Nirav Shah, back to the show. Nirav and Sentinel have that better way. In Sentinel's solution, a patient uses a highly accurate wrist cuff to take a reading, which transmits via Bluetooth to their phone and into a secure platform that gets that data to their care team. It solves the problems I already talked about while also creating a bigger data set to provide better care for the patient. This week, I talk with Nirav about telemedicine in general and about what he and Sentinel are doing to pair telemedicine with blood pressure management to help patients receive better care while making it easy to comply with doctors' post-hospital instructions. So before we start, let's talk a little bit about who Nirav is. Dr. Nirav H. Shah is a fellowship-trained neurologist and subspecialist in cerebrovascular and stroke medicine with board certifications in neurology, stroke medicine, carotid neurosonology, transcranial Doppler ultrasound, and neuroimaging. He's a practicing neurohospitalist and served as the stroke medical director at Swedish Medical Center in Seattle. Academically, he's interested in emergent critical care neurology research and is an associate editor for the Neurohospitalist, a peer-reviewed journal. He enjoys mentoring trainees and collaborating on publications and conference presentations. Outside of clinical care, Dr. Shah is collaborating with experts to develop scalable technologies capable of ameliorating healthcare's challenges. He consults with startups and investors to develop technologies and devices so that one day they are available to his patients. He's worked with companies to meet FDA regulations for approval, as well as to help them understand the provider perspective of product market fit. Dr. Shah, of course, is the CEO and founder of Sentinel Healthcare. He's also a passionate traveler and photographer. So let's catch up with Nirav. Well, Nirav, thank you for joining us again, and again so quickly, since this is going to be my second attempt at this one. But I'm thrilled to have you on the show and want to talk about telemedicine this week. It's something that's near and dear to my heart from my love of technology and my newfound appreciation of all the stuff that's happening in emergency medicine and in post-stroke care. So how did you get into telemedicine?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me back again. And it really started with how I got involved in neurology. And so as I was training in neurology, one of the things I realized is that stroke is a big cause of disability, the biggest cause of disability in the US. And yet there weren't nearly enough stroke neurologists taking care of the people who've had a stroke. And so stroke neurology over the past decade has been forced to scale through telemedicine. Every year, there are about 10 cardiologists born for every stroke-oriented person, whether stroke neurologist or neurocritical care person. And so that discrepancy is really big, which is why neurologists were the first adopters of video-based care. And we should maybe take a step a little bit further back and talk about kind of how healthcare has been delivered for the past couple centuries. It's always been face-to-face. And since, the 1800s, when a doc would go to someone's home, it'd be face-to-face. And that was not very efficient, but very high quality. And then over time, the hospital was created and patients were in the hospital and nursing systems were created. And now, for the first time this decade, we've been able to reach everybody through a camera. To the point where it's so substantial that Medicare and major insurances will reimburse it for veterans and in rural health areas, and eventually it'll probably be just a part of how we all take care of patients. And so to kind of answer your question, stroke was the forefront of that because of absolute need. There aren't enough stroke neurologists to help make critical decisions about thrombectomy and lytics in the country. And so in Seattle, where I've been working, we're able to take care of people as far as Alaska and Montana and California as needed.
And that's fantastic because, in my case, obviously, I was just a very short drive from the hospital. But if I had been in one of the outlying communities in the state of Washington, Wenatchee, Cle Elum, and Ellensburg, or smaller towns that I have never even heard of, let alone what's happening in Alaska and Montana, the idea of just not having the resources there to make the same advanced care decisions is just very frustrating.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I mean, I think that's what telehealth has been great at, and that's a big part of the future. And then the next step is also here, which is remote monitoring.
Right. And remote monitoring is a very cool idea, too, of being able to provide that care for the patient, even if the patient isn't necessarily able to readily go to the doctor for that one-on-one care. Because, obviously, especially post-stroke, when somebody may be dealing with more physical disabilities and challenges, simply navigating the logistics of getting around a city to get to an appointment on time, and then, are the appointments running on schedule? Is the patient on time? That's a lot of extra hassle. And when you want to talk about monitoring something like blood pressure on a regular basis, now you're talking about putting the patient at that place where they've already in a high stress situation, not only white coat syndrome, but also the whole idea of just the anxiety of just getting there is a big hassle.
No, exactly. And I mean, I think that's something that's really important. Remote monitoring is going to be a big part of healthcare one way or another. Medicare this week approved that they're going to have it on the docket for 2020 for nursing homes and home health. It's already approved as of January of 2018, and there are more reimbursements coming.
That's very cool. I also, also seems like, as we start looking longer term and start looking at a lot of that live monitoring too, I know one of the things that when I hear hospitals sort of self-critical of is, say, one of the worst things we do is let patients get quality sleep. And we're constantly having to go in and do vitals and monitor them too. So everything from, obviously there's a ton of benefit to the remote monitoring at home, but there's also some benefit even in inpatient setting.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah. I mean, if we can make continuous care possible in the inpatient setting, it could drastically reduce nursing work. It could reduce the effort that we have to spend, waking and hassling patients. It'd be a huge boon. Now, in the outpatient setting, it's clearly even better because, we send people home with a stroke and then we have no insight into what's happening for them.
Yeah, and then we have to try and manage getting that cuff on and recording our information to report back.
Yeah, exactly. And so to this extent, I have created what was a side project that's morphed into a company and a startup called Sentinel Healthcare, which is focused on providing remote monitoring technologies. And I started with the stroke survivors first. A few years ago, I was doing...
Because we're the cool kids.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's the kids I take care of. It's the kids I take care of. Yeah, so a few years ago, I was doing research on wearable technology for heart arrhythmia using what's called PPG or photoplethysmogram. And what I realized with my colleagues is that the bigger problem wasn't the technologies that Apple has gone on to create and Fitbit and so on that have now just gotten FDA approval. It would be who would receive that information and how would it be made useful so that providers could make actionable decisions for their patients. And so that's the goal of Sentinel. Sentinel is a remote monitoring platform that uses FDA-approved technologies such as blood pressure cuffs, fever monitors, pulse ox monitors, and our goal is to do more eventually. But we start with blood pressure because it's the biggest problem in healthcare. It's the most modifiable cause of stroke. And in my clinic in Seattle, I used to have 50 to 60% of the people show up with high blood pressure after their stroke, which seemed mind-blowing. And so we're very, very bad at dealing with high blood pressure as a society, despite all the technologies we have.
And I think one of the reasons for that, too, and I know in my experience, is that high blood pressure, when you have it, it doesn't hurt.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Exactly.
There's no pain. It doesn't seem to be impacting my life. In my case, I didn't even know I had it until I had a whole bunch of nosebleeds, but it's not impacting my life. It's not causing any pain. I'm never going to raise it with a doctor or go seek out care for it.
No, and that's exactly the issue, right? So it's called the silent disease for that reason that you just described. And that's why it's the biggest epidemic in healthcare. It affects 1 in 3 people overall. It kills more people than all cancers combined. It cost the healthcare system $131 billion last year. And so now it's becoming apparent that we need to do something about it if it hasn't been. And so remote monitoring is probably the first clear option to solve that problem, or at least provide meaningful insights into it. And it's not just about monitoring someone's blood pressure. It's about giving them the tool to understand what their body's doing and what they're feeling, as well as getting their care providers involved earlier rather than later. And so right now, a lot of healthcare has a reactive paradigm. You have high blood pressure, you had nosebleeds, so we did something about it. The goal that Sentinel has is to take that information on a daily basis, hopefully more than daily, but at least daily, and then to structure it. If I know that you're feeling dizzy or you have headaches and that you have high blood pressure as well, we could probably do something meaningful about that in terms of changing your medications around. The other example I'd give is we have a waitress who was working with us through a clinic in Phoenix, and she's in Sentinel, and sometimes she can't go work her shift because she gets too dizzy if she takes a full dose of medications. And so with high blood pressure monitoring, we've been very prescriptive, right? We say, this is the dose, and that's what you take, which is somewhat ironic because it's a dynamic process.
Right.
It's a dynamic process.
And your blood pressure is going to be radically different at different times in the day based on what you're doing. Have you just woken up? Have you just gotten out of the shower? Did you just eat? Did you just do all of your PT exercises?
Yeah, and that's exactly correct. And for people who've had heart problems or stroke, the balancing act of having good blood pressure but not high, causing headaches and recurrence of stroke or hemorrhage, and then not too low because someone has plaque in the arteries of the brain causing dizziness is a difficult one to find. But it's important that we find it and come up with dynamic approaches so that we say for this person who is a waitress, before your shift, you take half a dose, and then after, when you go home, you take another half so that you can get through your shift. Mm-hmm. For the person who called us and said, I wake up with headaches, but then 2 hours later, I take my meds, and 4 hours later, I feel good, because their blood pressure was normal. It's a simple solution. Just change the blood pressure med to the evening. The person won't wake up with headaches. And so the goal of Sentinel is to kind of change that prescriptive paradigm and make it more dynamic, make it tailored to the patient and the symptoms that they're going through, and structure the data so that if you have certain meds that you take and your blood pressure is doing something, over time that will change because it's a progressive problem.
Sure.
And so we believe that we have insights into starting to predict when you'll have a heart attack and stroke just based on our early data. And so currently we have grants that are under review by the National Science Foundation, by the National Institute of Health, to help advocate for us to build predictive models without invoking machine learning and the hype around AI.
Right. Because ultimately what it's about, in order to find those patterns, you have to have the data. In order to have the data, you have to collect the data. And you have to be able to collect a lot of data easily and reliably. And for stroke survivors to participate easily and reliably in collecting that data, it's a solution that is not going to come from a cuff, an arm cuff machine I'm going to put on and then try and write down and then get that into an app that I'm going to transmit. So it sounds like what your platform is doing then is trying to facilitate all of those problems.
Exactly. And you raised a good point, right? If you just put it on paper, it's not very useful because I don't have any context. I don't know when you took your meds. I don't know what you were doing. I don't know if you had any symptoms. And the other thing that you just raised is it's got to be very easy. And so we were just talking about this example earlier, but a lot of new technologies that are Bluetooth enabled, now when you turn them on or connect them to an app, they just work. Whereas before you'd have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to get your car to connect to your phone through the Bluetooth settings. And it's becoming much better. And so Sentinel's app does just that. It works with the blood pressure cuffs that we have partnered with, the makers, at the level of software, so that an 89-year-old can use it. We have multiple 89-year-olds and about 20 80-year-olds and hundreds of people in the 65 to 90-year-old demographic that are using our app on a daily basis. And when we started this, no one believed it was possible. Everyone told us, even just a year and a half ago, some of the biggest names in stroke said it can't be done. And what we've done to date is demonstrate that it can. And then when I said that, they said, well, that's just because you're in places like Seattle and San Francisco, where the tech literacy and the affluence is high. And that's also not true. We're now taking care of people and monitoring them in Eastern Appalachia, in the Tennessee, North Carolina region, where internet penetration is pretty low, and they're still logging multiple blood pressures a day. And what it comes back to is not just ease of use or user interface and the user experience, but also making it important. And like the example we've talked about before is people don't take their blood pressure seriously until you explain how important it is to them, and until you share with them that there's some context and that there's something going to happen with that data. So if you brush your teeth every day to prevent cavities, we think you should do this every day to prevent the next heart attack and stroke, or at least give us a chance to know that something is happening.
Right. I think it's one of those things too. A lot of folks just naturally assume that folks who are older are not going to be able to handle technology. And a couple of things that I think come into play there is that, first of all, the technology has gotten so much easier. And secondly, it's become such just a part of our lives that regardless of age, you're probably using technology in some way. And the other thing is that the folks who created the internet, they're in their 80s and 90s now. Folks in their 50s and are the folks who built the modern internet economy through the 90s and the 2000s. So, there's this perception that somebody who's over 60 can't handle technology. Folks who are over 60 made the technology. And, we're seeing refinements now, but, it's really one of those things you have to be very careful about, always careful about making those assumptions. And urban versus rural, what I found when I was selling computer technology in retail, folks coming in from the rural communities, they knew more about technology than most of the folks who were from the urban communities.
That's correct. And I think it's because it means more to them.
Exactly.
It was a better way to stay connected and involved in the world than someone, let's say, who's in a very urban environment who could just get information easily.
Exactly. I mean, I had small farmers coming in driving their tractors from laptop computers and GPS and knowing all this technology and how this technology is going to impact their lives. Mm-hmm. So we have to be very careful about making those assumptions.
Yeah, and look, we certainly have a lot of work to do as well, because one of the problems that Sentinel is trying to address is an infrastructure problem. Mm-hmm. So if I wanted to manage your blood pressure, you could just send it to me via text or email or some other mechanism, and I could just work with you directly. The real challenge is, how do you build a road? How do you build something that can monitor and manage thousands of people's blood pressure and enable nursing teams or pharmacology teams, I should say pharmacists, to manage that data seamlessly and make good decisions. Mm-hmm. And while that seems like it's easy, it's actually quite challenging because there are comorbidities, there are drug-drug interactions, there are other side effects, there are individual, problems that one person might have that another might not have. And so some people might say this seems too complicated to deliver as a single standalone thing, and clearly that's not the case. And so that's what we're working towards, because what I think will happen one day is that there will not be enough time for a provider to spend on this. And so they will just contract it out. And so systems of care like Swedish or Kaiser might build these types of teams within, but they'll still need tools to do that.
Sure.
And so what will probably happen, and I know this for a fact because places like Kaiser and Swedish are talking about this, is they will license this out, and a team of people who only care about blood pressure will do that all day, every day.
It's interesting. And, it's like something I read a few years ago was about how much of radiology is being outsourced overseas.
Yeah.
Whereas you can take a scan in the U.S. and outsource it to less expensive radiologist specialists who can then look at those scans and produce their report and send that data back.
Yeah. And that's a big part of what's happened. Unfortunately, Medicare has not been very supportive of outsourcing certain things. Mm-hmm. And so that's shifted the other way. And so, in fact, in our specific space of remote monitoring and chronic care management, there were other companies that were trying to do this and use nurses in the Philippines. And so you think win-win maybe, right? There's a team in the Philippines that could provide good care. Filipino nurses are generally quite good. There are many, many in the U.S. that came through H-1B visas years ago. And so they have a strong nursing tradition, but Medicare ruled that that's not acceptable. And so the challenge now is how do we work with that? Because labor costs are rising.
Right.
Especially in places like Seattle, San Francisco, Boston, New York, etc. And so we have to try and find ways to mitigate that, because otherwise we'll never actually take care of this crisis. And what will keep happening is what's been happening is we'll try and find more ways to do surgeries, try and find more ways to make more money through fee-for-service-based approaches, which won't solve these insidious problems that affect lots and lots of people, because they seem like they're knick-knack when they're really quite large.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. And, that, of course, goes to one of the broader challenges, too, where success in reducing, obviously, everybody wants success in reducing the incidence of strokes and reducing the incidence of all these other things. But a lot of times it's resolving the issue afterwards, where the revenue is to fund the initiatives to prevent the revenue-generating activities to begin with.
Yeah. And I think that's finally where Medicare is starting to head, is telehealth solved access. Now we can be anywhere and take care of people almost everywhere in the country. Mm-hmm. And then now remote monitoring will solve scale.
And so as we get into remote monitoring and addressing the scale, I think what a lot of folks will hear about as soon as you mention the internet in this context in transmitting data is, protecting patient privacy and protecting the security of that information. So how does a platform like this address some of those concerns?
That's a really, really good question. And a big part of keeping people's peace of mind about that has been HIPAA. So in the consumer space, like Facebook and Google, they've never had to have significant privacy issues because there's no HIPAA for the consumer space.
Sure.
Whereas in our space, healthcare, HIPAA has been the standard since the 90s. And so our data is HIPAA compliant from the start to the end, which is really, really important. Now, I don't know that anyone really cares about blood pressure data, but it could be important. I mean, what we don't want is for someone to say, hey, you have these problems, we got access to this data, and therefore you don't get a home loan or something like that. And so what we have done is kept all the data secure from start to finish. It's encrypted from the moment it gets into the app to the moment it goes to the cloud, and then it goes to the provider, and they sign a note, and then they send it to the reimbursement for the work that was done, and all of that is kept encrypted.
So, and what's interesting about that too is, when I sometimes hear folks talk about, some data protection and encryption and security concerns with other things, the idea is that once you've got it in that app, transmitted from that that wrist cuff to that app, now that's secure. It's a lot more secure than my paper log of data that's sitting in my apartment.
Exactly.
It's like, some people would say, when I talk about online cloud storage for my data, is that really secure? It's like, well, it's more secure than the computer in my apartment that somebody could kick in my door and take. But
exactly,
by having this there, so it provides that extra level there. And then from that point, being able to combine it with the other data, it seems like in order to look at the emergent trends and see the actual results, now you start pooling data in an anonymized way.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And right, I mean, if I know that I have people who've had a stroke in aggregate or in a general large number, I'll be able to start making some understanding about them.
Right.
So that's our goal.
Fantastic. And going beyond that, too, you start talking about monitoring other things, everything from blood sugar to lung capacity to heart. I mean, one of the things I had when I was, got out of the hospital was I had to wear the Zeo patch, this thing taped to my chest for 2 weeks, and then mail it in someplace so somebody could get data from it, which just boggles my mind as having been in the tech business for a while. What is this big blue box on the corner for?
Well, and that's a great point. I mean, those devices that you have to mail in make no sense because they're limited usage. And so what we'll aim to do is to provide repeat usage or continuous usage heart monitors that you could plug and charge again and then add a new sticky and wear it as you need it. Because one of the problems with that type of technology you just named is that 2 weeks of data is not enough. We know that the average time to identify irregular heartbeats, called atrial fibrillation, is at least 80 to 90 days. And that even if we monitor people for 2 years after stroke, we only find it 50% of the time. And so the median time to find it's much longer than 80 to 90 days. And so clearly we're wasting a lot of money by monitoring for 2 weeks and spending all this effort doing that, but then not going the full amount of time until we capture what we need to capture. And so our goal after blood pressure will be to do the same thing for heart monitoring.
So if somebody is interested in participating with Sentinel, is this something that an individual patient could ask their provider about today?
Sure. Yeah, they could. And their provider they're more than willing to sign up and work with them. I mean, we're providers that will work with any provider. And it's quite simple. It's a win-win for everybody. We help the providers do the right thing, meaning take care of their patients better. We provide technology and some coverage, for the data and the liabilities around that. And then we also help them do what they're trying to do anyway, just take better care of the patient. So it's really no cost to the provider, which is the one thing that I kind of emphasize. If we need to buy new technologies throughout healthcare, usually they're quite expensive. The way Sentinel is designed is for providers to be able to access it immediately. And then if there are reimbursements from it based on the patient's insurance plan or whatever, we will share those revenues so that Sentinel will get paid so that we can continue building the technology. And that makes it easy. It's win-win, right? And there's no upfront kind of implementation fees yet. And that's because we really want people to use this. We don't want there to be a barrier. And yes, there's a little bit of learning and, we have to train the staff, but we're happy to do that because we really believe in this. I mean, we're very, very bullish on what we've built so far because we know it works. And so I have stepped down from my prior roles at Swedish as a stroke director and as a full-time person there to go work on this full-time because I've already seen the impact of it in just the first few hundred patients and how much they use it, how much they like it, to the extent that I think this will become a really, really important part of healthcare infrastructure and that I want to go build and deliver.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking with us about this today. I think this is a really exciting step in post-hospital care and hopefully preventing more and more strokes in the future.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill.
And that brings us to our hack of the week. As a stroke survivor, do you like the work that your inpatient team did? Did they help you walk or eat or speak again? If you haven't talked to them since leaving the hospital, the holiday season is a great time to send a note or a card. Once patients leave their care, most inpatient occupational, physical, and speech therapists and others never hear any more about the patient and about the work that they did and about the work they helped the patient do. If you really want to brighten their day, send an email or a physical note or visit the rehab unit you spent time in and tell them how you're doing. They love to hear from their alumni and to celebrate the progress that you've made. A card or note is a simple, low-cost gift for the holiday or really any season. As we wrap up today, I am really excited about the potential of what Sentinel Healthcare is doing, and really beyond Sentinel Healthcare with what telemedicine and communications platforms for medical devices that help patients communicate more effectively and automatically with their doctors and with their care staff. Because that constant flow of data, because that frequent flow of data can make it easier to spot things that are happening on an ongoing basis and on an emergent basis before they become crisis situations, and give patients and doctors a chance to actually do something about it. And of course, the other thing that's really exciting is that when you start looking at what you can do with these large anonymized data sets in terms of understanding the patterns that are out there, what happens from different medications, what happens at different times of day, what happens in different conditions, it gives us a tremendous tool for research to understand what exactly is happening in our bodies and to help develop new treatments and new processes that go forward to help lower costs and, more importantly, provide better quality and quantity of life for all of us. So be sure to check out Sentinel's Healthcare to learn more about their product and their solutions, and to potentially take advantage of that product and solution yourself. You can visit strokecast.com/sentinel for this and a whole bunch of other links. Send a message to your rehab team this holiday season and let them know how you're doing. Or send that message to them at any time in the year and let them know how you're doing. They love hearing from former patients. Be sure to subscribe to Strokecast for free in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you next week.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.